can be very hard to convince others of the magic, the spirit, the possibilities in their lives. It's hard to explain something to somebody who is very unconscious of their own behaviors. There's certain words, let alone there's certain words, especially I notice in some of the my more intimate relationships, my talking with family members, sometimes talking with neighbors, just talking with other people in general who are maybe on a different vibration. They experience life a bit differently than I do. It's as if we're programmed sometimes. Some of us are just programmed to dismiss certain words, certain concepts. It's like using the words vibration, frequency, resonance, spirit, God, magic, anything that may be considered mystical. A lot of the time, there's a lot of people who are just programmed to kind of dismiss any value that these words might have. Sometimes you can get into a conversation and it seems like there's reciprocity in the interaction, and then as soon as you start getting into this more esoteric, mystical, kind of spiritual territory, you could just feel that something just kind of shuts off in the other person. They kind of turn their head, go back to what they're doing, go, okay, yeah. Kind of give you these kind of glib, dismissive responses. And then basically, either change the subject or just stop talking altogether sometimes, as if you weren't even talking to them. Just something kicks in, and like a protection mechanism, a defense mechanism against something that is ultimately bigger than our individual person, that may put another person's point of view or their worldview into question. And spirituality and mysticism and these kinds of things are, to be fair, they are boundary dissolving. They are world dissolving. They do change the way that you perceive life when you open yourself up to these things. And so I guess I can understand it to some extent, but there does come a time, at least I can understand the dismissal of it to an extent, because it can be scary, and we tend to veer away from things that are scary or are too, just unfamiliar, not what we're used to. But at the same time, there's a reason that this kind of information is always being offered in some way or another, no matter who you are, what kind of lifestyle you live, no matter what your belief system is. You really cannot get through a full human lifetime without experiencing the mystical, the esoteric, the spiritual, that which is beyond explanation, oftentimes. There's just no way around it. There's going to be things that don't mesh with a person's version of reality. There's going to be things that question our beliefs, no matter who we are. There are many of us who are spiritual and who are open to the more mystical sides of things. But still, we are challenged. And in our worldview and our self-identity and perception is challenged. So, you imagine someone who's open to it as being challenged. You imagine what it's like for someone who's really trying to avoid it at every turn and bend in the road. It's really a constant, and it really harkens back to change is the only constant. And as you change, as you grow, you do become more open-minded. You do become more open-hearted. You become more receptive, and when you become more receptive, you become more sensitive. And in that sensitivity, the world feels different. You do enter into higher vibrations. You do develop a broader understanding. And when you enter into a different vibration, the world that you once perceived becomes a different world to your eyes. It feels different. It looks different. The old explanations don't suffice anymore. The old sense of who you were and what was important to you, that also can change. Because you realize that that was not an objective fact. It was not a physical fact of life. It was a relative point of view. And all relative things change. That's why it's relative. Because it's subject to change. And there's, of course, nothing at all wrong with that. Can you imagine if the forest just stayed in one season all year round? Could be a great season, could be summer, or late spring or something, early autumn, it could be a really great season. But still, you'd get tired of it. And it wouldn't dazzle you, and it wouldn't offer you that sense of appreciation that we get from experiencing all the different contrasts. Why is it that we experience such gratitude for the spring and summer? Because we experience the wilting that comes in autumn and the coldness of the winter. And so when the sun starts kind of shining and the days become longer and the grass is growing again and things are warming up, there's a real sense of relief and just gratitude for that. And this is so true in so many different aspects of our life, where so much of that change that maybe we're fearing to make a change, or we just are feeling dismissive towards concepts that are challenging. It's like, but then afterward, after being dismissive, after, not wanting to be open to something, we then feel a sort of lack or a hunger or a thirst for something more vibrant and life-affirming. And it's because, the freshness that we're really looking for, it really comes from the change that sometimes we're afraid to make or just afraid to allow. Because, as I've noticed, I'm sure many have noticed, as you open yourself up to change, it's like life begins to flow more easily. It becomes less of an effort, more of, it's more you're allowing yourself to be open, rather than trying to pry open some rusty thing and using tools and trying to make all this effort. It becomes more of a free-flowing thing. It becomes easier just to kind of listen to your intuition and to just honor that. Because the more that you do that, the more that you open up to change and the more you open up to the world, even if it's challenging at first, you start seeing how things just kind of work out. Things that may have been challenging in the past suddenly just kind of clear up unexpectedly. And that your old self maybe would think, well, that's impossible, or wow, that would be so miraculous if this problem cleared up just like that. But then it happens. And it continues to happen, and your faith becomes stronger, and then you don't fear that change, you don't fear that challenge so much. So I would really advise anyone who does feel challenged or just is feeling dismissive towards whatever different things come up in life, to not run away with that impulsive fear. It's good to give things a chance to kind of grow on you. And to really give yourself a chance also to feel into what's happening and not running away with an impulsive sort of assumption or presumption about what it is that you're experiencing. It's best not to draw immediate conclusions until you've really allowed yourself to kind of open up to the full potential of what's changing in your life. And having faith in the unknown, that's really the big thing. So I think so much fear comes from the fear of the unknown. It's almost like the fear of death, or the fear of loss, the fear of not having what you need. And you see these fears are really, when you avoid that change, it's like you're keeping yourself in the fear. You think you're running away from the fear, but it's like you're running away with the fear. And you realize that all the abundance and all the change and all the freshness that you're actually, that would actually be a perfect remedy for the fear you might be experiencing, that is in the change that you're then fearing to make or fearing to allow. So it can be, it's quite a self-perpetuating delusion in a way. It's an illusion also. Believing something to be true that isn't. So when you really get down to it, there's really no reason not to have faith in the path forward. No matter what you're experiencing, it's always going to be of benefit to have that trust, to have that faith, to allow yourself to be receptive, allow yourself to be sensitive, and allow yourself to be open to the change as it comes.